Unpopular Chelsea opinions. What are some of yours? That is going to be the focus of today's show. I did the classic thing with the old tangled meme with all the swords facing one guy and asking people to give me their most unpopular Chelsea opinions. And we got some fascinating responses and we're going to react to them. I'm going to give you my thoughts on them, whether I endorse, condemn, ponder, maybe like just debate and discuss some of these opinions, because some of them are quite out there, but some of them I actually don't think are that even unpopular or wild to suggest. But in the comments below, if you weren't one of those that submitted on Twitter to give me your unpopular opinion, get involved in the comments and put your unpopular opinions and also responses to some of these opinions which you may either vehemently agree or disagree with. So please do get involved, hit that like button, subscribe to the show if you're new around here. We've had many new subs during the Club World Cup and into the transfer window, so please go and do so and make sure you don't miss any of the uploads as we ramp up to covering Chelsea's 25-26 campaign. So let's start off here. This is probably quite a controversial one to start up, and I just randomized that. I took the screenshots and put them into a document to look on here. Sakif here says, Clearlake has been the best thing to happen to us. I don't think many people would agree with that statement. If you know my stance, I've been very critical of the club, but I'm also someone who's always willing to change their opinion when you get new evidence and also give praise where I think it's worthy. The difficulty with an ownership is particularly because of the assessment of the previous ownership that came to a sudden but in many ways a definitive conclusion, is then you can reflect on a whole period of the club's history, and whoever took over post Abramovich was always going to be in some ways struggling, because to try and compete with an ownership that had led Chelsea to heights no one anticipated and deliver that consistent level of success would always be very, very difficult in a new Premier League era and age where it's more competitive than it was when Abramovich arrived in the early 2000s. So I think there is that. I wouldn't say they've been the best thing to happen to us. I mean, when you say Clearlake, you're not really including Bowley in that. And I think he's maybe more positive part of the ownership, in my personal opinion on that. And yeah, I think there are things absolutely still to criticise, even if things on the pitch have been better in recent months. That's undeniable. But yeah, I don't get the extreme of they're the best thing to happen to us. But in some ways, that's difficult because their ownership isn't over yet. So we may revisit this unpopular opinion and it becomes popular in retrospect. Stanford Strange says we don't need another centre-back. I don't think that is an unpopular opinion. Maybe to some of you that's an unpopular opinion. But I do think that is a stance that has probably become more popular based on what we saw at the Club World Cup. I do remember sitting here a few months ago talking about a new centre-back and particularly looking for an older profile of centre-back. It's become clear that either isn't there in the market anymore or Chelsea just aren't pursuing that type of defender. Added with the performance of our defence at the Club World Cup against some very good teams. You look at the consistently brilliant performances of Trevor Chalobah, who I'm always going to defend and do think is good enough. I wrote a piece on my Substack recently about how much I love Trev and why he has always been good enough for Chelsea. And yeah, like other areas of the squad, if you're going to bring in Joao Hato, who could play as a centre-back anyway and offer a bit more depth in that position, and Levi Colwell has come on leaps and bounds in recent months. Tosin Adebayo has done a lot better than I anticipated. That's not to say there's no way for the defence to improve, but I wouldn't just want to spend money on anyone just to, clog up that area even more. We definitely have good depth options. I think the question has always been like that kind of dominant centre-back to come in, but, are we developing that within the players we already have? And in a year's time, we've already got those players and we don't need to then go out and sign any more. I think that's a question maybe you could answer in the comments below. AV8 says here we should keep Jackson and sell Neto. I do think, in my personal view, this is not unpopular, but I know to many of you and to many people online, especially on Twitter, this would be unpopular because Nicholas Jackson is kind of, it sounds extreme to say enemy number one, like main villain sort of vibes at the moment, but he is definitely someone whenever you try and defend him that you get a lot of retraction and a lot of people coming back saying that's ridiculous. And Neto, I think, gets a lot of plaudits. I mean, obviously deep sympathies with what happened with a close friend, and the way with Diogo Jota, and the way he responded to that and kept on playing when no one would have blamed him if he didn't play the rest of the Club World Cup. I thought his performances in the Club World Cup were probably some of the best Chelsea performances he's had since signing last year. But I don't think many people would believe in buying selling Neto and keeping Nicholas Jackson. Although, if you told me right now you have to sell one of them, I would agree with that. I would keep Nicholas Jackson and sell Pedro and Neto. Zago here says Badiashile is going to come very good one day. I was an early advocate of Benois Badiashile at Chelsea. The problem is, I just think he's regressed. I know he's had a couple of injuries, and Chelsea have consistently bought other defenders around him, so he's had to struggle to maybe to gain minutes. But I don't know. I think the problem is with Badiashile is we've seen a bit of him now where I think his level can be quite decent, especially as a rotational option. It's not that he's a disaster. He's not, Axel Disasi, I think my big problem with him is like when he has an off day, he has a really, really bad off day. And unfortunately, they became far too prevalent. I think Badiashile, it's more like, he does have these lapses. I don't think he's that dominant a defender, and I'm kind of wondering, is there going to be a severe development in his career, especially when you've got other players in the area that you want to commit more time to. I think he may become a very good player. I just don't think that's going to happen at Chelsea. Chelsea India here says we should keep Joao Felix and rotate him with Palmer. He'll come good. He just needs one full season and not a 6-month loan. Carmel with Palmer, cool name. We should be looking to upgrade Cucurella instead of trying to find a rotational option. I can kind of understand his point of view. There are still some people who are doubtful about Marc Cucurella. I don't really understand why. I just think the evidence on Marc Cucurella is pretty clear now that he is, at the very least, at the most reserved you could be about praising him. He's a dependable, I think, decent left back for Chelsea. You don't need to go out and say he's the greatest left back. He's, all these kind of silly terms that get bandied about on social media. But in terms of that situation, I mean, you could argue we're doing that with Joao Hato. Who knows the lengths and scale of, levels that Hato could reach at Chelsea. Hato could become that player. Chelsea might just be about to sign that player, and it may take Hato a bit to become that player, but he may develop into that. Samuel Smith may return from loan and become that player. There may be another player out there at left back who becomes that. I just personally disagree that we need to upgrade on him right now, because I think he is in his peak, he's in his prime. And you want to keep that and maintain that as much as you can and see how far it goes. Is this now the level Cucurella is at? Because he's been at it for a decent chunk of time now. It's not, a few weeks. It's over a year he's been at a high level. If he maintains that, he's going to remain as Chelsea's first choice left back. And I don't think many people, maybe other than ones that, don't really want to agree that, Cucurella has turned around opinion and his form will be Chelsea's first choice, and I don't have any problem with that. Jonathan here says, jury is still out on Moresca until the end of the coming season. We were told he'd need at least 2 seasons to judge, but as soon as things go well for a spell, then that gets forgotten in the rush to anoint him. He might well be that, and I hope he is, but let's wait for now. I actually don't think this is out there in terms of judging Enzo Moresca and actually having a critical mind. One of the things I would say, and one of the things that still frustrates me, I get comments on this show on Twitter as well, where people constantly want to bring out receipts and bring up when people were critical during bad periods last season, when in the moment I think it was right to be critical, and then laugh at you a few months later when then you're actually praising the team, and apparently you were wrong for criticising when everyone else was criticising. And I think it's fair, Moresca, just because he's won the Club World Cup, just because he won the Conference League and we got in the Champions League, that doesn't mean we shut off our brains for 9 months. I would never advocate any supporter doing that. I think it's within range and within balance and perspective. If Chelsea lose a game in their first few in the season, I will criticise if it's a really bad performance, but it's about then not going overboard and saying it's the end of the world. I think that is something absolutely, it's about that balance, but, jury is still out. I mean, I think probably that's probably the harshest part of that opinion, but I do think that if we have a really bad season, then we're obviously going to have a very different conversation. But I think right now he absolutely has deserved second season. He earned it, and it's right. I think people are positive about him at the moment because things are going well on the pitch. When they're not, there will be more negativity, there will be more criticism. I think people have to accept that is the way football works. Brooksy here, Garnacho would be good at Chelsea. We've got a couple of these. Mike also said Garnacho would be a good signing, and one we need to make as we lack dynamic, pacey, true winger depth, specifically on the left. Garnacho is a name that just does not go away, and Garnacho is a name that sparks a lot of revolt whenever he's linked to Chelsea, as far back as January. And I understand why. There is probably a likelihood of Chelsea trying to sign Garnacho seriously this summer. I still think there is. And that's not me endorsing that. I think that there's a possibility that by the end of this transfer window, Garnacho is a Chelsea player. Purely because it's one of those stupid transfer window things where the player has no future at Man United. And a bit like Jadon Sancho, who didn't turn out to be a disaster, but I don't think turned out to be a great signing for Chelsea, needs a home, and it's why that loan became available. And with the wages, a lot of clubs financially are not going to be able to buy the player. And it's almost like the club kind of forces themselves to act and for an opportunity in the market. And it seems like our sporting directors are kind of quite high on signing Gonato. Now, one of the things I would say about Gonato, and I would ask anyone who's really negative on him, I understand why, because I think off the pitch, I think some of his, the character of him and the way he's fallen out with head coaches and the way Man United fans speak about him. Man United fans obviously at the moment very negative about their club, and there is a counter argument about players moving out of Man United and finding new life and new energy and thriving. There absolutely is that counter argument, and I don't think it's a stupid one. I think there is a lot of justification for that argument. But if you are someone that's really, really down on Gonato, and I probably join you on that, I don't think we should sign him. I don't want to sign him this summer. If you look at the numbers around him, they are not terrible. Some people who I really respect have looked at these numbers and say, it doesn't really look like a player who's completely worthless, completely tragic, has no ability as a young player to get better. So something to ponder, and probably why Chelsea are, among other reasons, probably still around, floating around Garnacho. And maybe these people, despite being unpopular opinions right now, could be proven right in a short period of time. Dollar Bill says Enzo is the most overrated Chelsea player currently, and he isn't good enough in midfield. Yeah, I don't think many people will agree with you. I think if you posted this 9 months ago, I think you would have more people, including myself, having more sympathy for that argument. But it's a bit like Cucurella, a bit like other players. I think they have developed a lot. And Enzo Fernandez, for me now, is one of Chelsea's best and most reliable and kind of non-negotiable starters. The performance levels of him, I just think are hard to ignore. He scores important goals. He creates a lot of opportunities. I think he's grown in his leadership role, which is why I cannot agree with this opinion. My mate Louis Benavente, Timo Werner wasn't that bad. Yeah, this is a trigger point for me with Timo Werner. Timo Werner was not completely worthless. Timo Werner did not obviously. It wasn't a case where he did nothing for Chelsea. He obviously, as everyone always brings up, this decoy run that he made in the build-up to Chelsea's Champions League winner. I mean, in some ways, I sort of look at that, and I do praise decoy runs on the show when we're looking at goals, right? And I say, because obviously when you're deconstructing a goal, you look at it, but is that worth the money Chelsea paid for a player? I'm not entirely sure. Is that world-class talent? Does that completely excuse the rest of his Chelsea career? Because the rest of Timo Werner's Chelsea career really was a huge, huge, huge letdown and disappointment. Technically, I will stand by this opinion. I mean, Werner is technically one of the poorest players I've ever seen play for Chelsea. His first touch was abysmal. Some of his decision-making IQ on the pitch was atrocious, and for a player who cost that much, who was earning that much, who had this profile and also gained so many minutes over other players who were then let go by the club, who I think could have gained more whilst he was at the club, that's something that I just cannot get over. And I look at his career since leaving Chelsea. I don't think I've been proven wrong on that opinion. You look at the way he's performed at Spurs. I mean, again, you see the limitations to his game. He's a very limited footballer. And, I think with transfers, you want to be expanding your options, not limiting them as a football team. And I think that's the problem with Timo Werner. In some ways, you can have a go at Chelsea that they didn't understand the player well enough and how he was going to adapt to a new league and system, something we talk about quite regularly as well. And I've been critical of, and I've been positive about this summer, is we've targeted players who I think logically, doesn't mean it's going to work out, but logically fit in with what Enzo Moresca wants to do. But Werner, on his own, the goal output as well, like all of the things about him, technically being poor and not being like a player that Physically too, he was constantly offside. Some of his decision making was horrendous. His goal tally too was atrocious as well. So it's not like you could justify and write all of that off. It's why I'm more defensive of Nicholas Jackson, because at least his goal tally is far more respectable. Teams here says winning the Club World Cup doesn't mean that the project is justified or that the sporting directors are suddenly acceptable. Next season will be a real test. I think that again, it goes back to that first question about like Clearlake, right? And, you know, being the best thing, and an extreme is like nothing has changed. I think you can absolutely sit somewhere in the middle and go, we celebrate the Club World Cup. I've literally got a hoodie on. I've just got world champions as a Chelsea fan. And loving it, right? And love that performance. It was one of the best Chelsea performances I've ever seen. And I have no problem going from a position a few months ago of not seeing that much positivity, because at the time I couldn't see much positivity, to now praising. I don't know why people have to be so entrenched. I don't think it's wrong to have some hesitancy about the upcoming season and think every single problem Chelsea have is now gone, eradicated, and there are no concerns, there are no positions where you look at and go, that could be strengthened. These are things that concern me over the course of next season. We will see. I think next season will be a real test, and you know, I think that the sporting directors in some ways still have to justify their positions. I think in terms of how this transfer window goes, right? Like, they've been given a transfer window after some horrendous ones. So just because I'm positive about the signings in the moment, you know, we will see if they actually turn out to be good, and that will of course create judgment. So I don't, in terms of the project, I think, you know, that's a very fluid term in terms of, and quite meaningless. It's more like, what are the results on the pitch? Are they objectively making Chelsea a better team? And listen, where we are from May to now is a lot closer to that than we were from, you know, March, and even before then. Like, right, the first couple of years of Clearlake didn't really show much of that. So yeah, it will be a test, but I'm far more positive than I am negative, and I don't think it's fair to kind of say nothing that's happened over the last few months really change anything. I'm not buying any of that. I think that's nonsense, to be honest. And finally, Jam, the brilliant Carefree Jam, definitely go and give him a follow. Marc Guiu will not be good enough to play for us. He isn't good enough to play for us right now, and I don't think this is a real unpopular or kind of ridiculous opinion. I think people have kind of forgotten about Marc Guiu, to be honest, because we've signed Joao Pedro, we've signed Liam Delap. Liam Delap is basically, you know, a far more advanced and better version of Marc Guiu. Marc Guiu is so raw, is another one of these young players who I do think is probably going to fall victim and be collateral damage to our mass, you know, consistent recruiting of new players, because I can see him going on loan somewhere in a year's time. Is there going to be any space for him left at Chelsea? And then he's sold off for a profit, because Chelsea bought him for what, around 4 or 5 million? I mean, a ridiculously low fee in this current market. That is basically a guaranteed flip for profit. And that's, cynically, that's what I always thought this deal was. And I think from where we sit right now, I think it will become that. That doesn't mean Guiu won't be good enough. I think he could have a decent championship loan. He could go out in Europe and probably have some decent minutes. And maybe, like other players, could later on in his career develop into that. But I think at Chelsea, yeah, I agree with you that it's a combination of just him not being good enough right now, there not being enough time to develop him, and him having to go elsewhere when we've already signed players who are young strikers who are going to gain that development time and probably are more worthy of getting that development time. So I don't think that's ridiculous. Let me know your thoughts on these unpopular opinions in the comments below. A nice variety. Some I disagree with, some I'm kind of in the middle of, some I really, really disagree with, and some I do endorse. So let me know whether you endorse, reject, and please do share some of your unpopular opinions. I'll be interested to hear them down in the comments below. But that is it for today's show. If you enjoyed what you saw today and heard today, please do like, subscribe, get involved in the community as we head towards the new season. Follow across the socials at SonOfChelsea. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.